All right, here we are. Letting folks in. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. John Avoli here, and Dan Gecker, good morning to you. I haven't seen you forever.
It feels that way. I guess it used to be Mr. Mayor, and now it's Delegate, but it's good to see you, John.
I think it's a demotion.
I've heard that said before.
Yes, sir. I saw Robin the other day. We had a good chat, so.
Yeah, he told me you were at the opening. We
Yes,
were
sir.
Happy to see
Very
you.
nice. Very nice.
Yeah. Have you stayed there yet?
No, but I've been there several times.
Good.
I only live 3 blocks from there, so there's no need.
You gonna let them tear down those buildings?
Well, it's a complex issue there that we're dealing with. It really is. It's amazing. Now, the renovation of that downtown has been part of my heart there, and it's complex.
All of us. Yep, it is.
Very complex, as you well know. I don't need to tell you that.
Good morning, Senator Lucas. Good to see you.
Good morning. It's good to be here on this rainy Monday. I think it's Monday since we had a holiday yesterday, but it's good to be here on this rainy Thursday morning.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And Senator Hashmi, good to see you as well. And Delegate Mugler, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So, Dr. Lane, I don't have anyone else in the attendee side right now. Do we want to wait just another minute or two in case a couple folks hop on, and then we'll go ahead and get started?
Yeah, that's good. Let's give it with just one more minute.
Okay.
Well, while we're waiting, we will be recording the session, and we will be repeating it yesterday. So many legislators will join us tomorrow as well, and we'll send this out by video. But thank you for joining our briefing today. We're looking forward to talking to you about activities at the board level and at the department in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and look forward to sharing information with you here in just a moment.
And also, just to let everybody know, obviously we did publicly notice this gathering here today, and we are live streaming it on the VDOE YouTube page. So I'm not sure if we have anyone tuning in, but we are live streaming it on our YouTube page.
Zach, long time no see.
Good morning. I'm glad we can see each other now. I'm glad it was delayed because I needed some time to get the coffee ready though.
I understand.
All right. I still don't have anyone else in the attendee group. So Dr. Lane, I will go ahead and share my screen to pull up our presentation, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, again, thank you all so much for being here. For those of you that don't know me yet or we haven't met, even in the audience, my name is James Lane. I'm the Superintendent of Public Instruction at the Department of Education. I'd like to thank our legislators for joining us to hear this briefing on activities related to COVID-19. We did invite members of both committees, and Senator Lucas, I didn't know if you wanted to take a moment and just say a quick hello from your committee.
Absolutely. There's never a time that I don't want to say hello to everybody. So on behalf of the Senate Committee on Education and Health, I just want to say good morning to everyone. And also one of my strongest members of my committee, Senator Hashmi, is here with us this morning. And good morning to you as well, Senator Hashmi. So I'm ready to listen and learn.
And thank you so much. And I know we have members of the House Committee as well. And I think your chair will be joining maybe in another session, but thank you all for joining us as well. We have the president of the Board of Education here. He'll be speaking later, Dan Gecker. But Dan, if you wanted to say good morning as well.
Happy to say good morning. Good to see all of you, and look forward to finishing up the session. In particular, as mentioned, the strong senator from my district, Senator Hashmi. It's always good to have you.
And so we will be sharing a wide variety of information. We have 4 major topics that I'll go through in a moment. We'll have actually breaks for questions through each of the 4 topics. And so, Emily, it might be good now to jump right into the overview of the briefing. The next slide. So first, I will give you an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on Virginia's public education system. We'll talk a little bit about how we've been implementing remote learning, how we've been working on getting access and devices, impacts on funding, and much more. Then a member of my team, Dr. Samantha Hollins, will join me to speak about initiatives specifically in special education student services. And then we'll wrap up our portion talking about some ongoing work that's happening at the Department of Education. Then we will turn it over to President Gecker and Vice President Dr. Jamel Wilson, who will present information from the Board of Education. And again, as we go through each of those 4 sections, we will conclude each section with time for questions and discussion. And as always, anyone can post questions in the chat, and we will make sure to answer those questions as well from the legislators on the call. So I will jump right into the briefing on COVID-19 and public education. Obviously, the pandemic has significantly impacted our public schools. As you know, on March 12th or March 13th, Governor Northam did order all schools closed originally for a 2-week period. And then on March 23rd, we closed schools for the remainder of the 1920 school year. This obviously created an abrupt shift to the way that we approached education. All of our school divisions immediately began to implement remote learning models, which is a huge kudos to our leaders and our teachers for the work that they did to make that possible during the closure. And some of the heroic efforts that school divisions put in place to keep students fed and keep the school nutrition program going during that time are especially laudable. The board, the Department of Education, sought and implemented significant waivers to ensure that students who needed to graduate on time could graduate. Students that were on track to be promoted to the next grade level could be promoted, and that we could provide some continuity of learning even in those most severe months of the closures in April and May. Our school divisions immediately began planning for opening school in the fall. The governor, of course, released the 3-phase plan for opening schools in June. And I can tell you that the educational experience that our students are receiving this fall is significantly superior to what we saw in the spring because of the planning and the time that our school divisions had to prepare for that. There are a variety of modalities going on, and on the next slide, I'll talk you through what that looks like a little bit. And Emily, I think we're on the slide with the map. Thank you. So in the top right, you'll see a map. This was a map that we released on September 22nd. We will be releasing a new map next week, and I'll talk through some predictions of what that'll look like, seeing some of the initial data. But when we opened the school originally, about 67 of our divisions were fully remote and virtual. And that represents nearly half of our school districts. The remainder of our school districts, shaded in the other colors here, had a modality that was anything from partial hybrid, which is maybe just some students in person some days of the week, to what we would consider a more full hybrid, which is where all students in the school get at least some in-person experience. And then we had several school divisions that went with a more aggressive approach with a full in-person of at least 3 or 4 days a week, and then a partial in-person where maybe that was every student in the school, but maybe a little bit less time. But because our largest school divisions did represent that shade in teal or green, it was a significant portion of our students. I would say almost 80% of our students that started the year fully virtual. When we release the map on November 12th next week with an update to this, a large number of our school divisions have announced plans to move towards one of the more in-person modalities. Most school divisions moving towards the beige, which would be a hybrid approach. And many of our larger school districts have taken that on as well. And so whereas we started the school year with about half of our school divisions and maybe 80% of our students in a remote setting, by the time these plans that are being voted on by school boards right now come to fruition, I think you'll see closer to 2/3 of schools being in some type of in-person, and that representing about 50% of the students. To prepare for this, Virginia Department of Education released the Recover, Redesign, and Restart 2020 document that's accessible on our website, which was a how-to guide for implementing the variety of modalities necessary to open schools and how schools could plan through all factors necessary to open schools. We also monitor and update a reopening FAQ that is well over 100 questions that are frequently asked questions from our school divisions, and to make sure that they are aware of any requirements or any rules that govern their opening. Our guidance has been targeted and centered on equity. You know, the governor's three-phase plan started with a recommendation if you're in the highest risk category. I'm going to talk about this in another slide, that you be closer to a predominantly virtual setting, and if you're in a lower risk category, that you would be closer to a hybrid or in-person setting. But as school divisions matriculate through those three phases, we did recommend that they keep equity at the center of their work and prioritize in-person learning for those most vulnerable students. Every week from March until October, I met with superintendents throughout the state, every superintendent in the state, every Tuesday morning. When we got to October and plans began to stabilize, we have gone to those calls on an as-needed basis. And through October and November, we have continued to meet with superintendents just about every other week. In the upcoming slides in a moment, I'm going to talk through the governor's three-phase plan and how we're recommending school divisions determine which phase of school opening they should be in based on the metrics in their community. And the VDH, who has been just an incredible partner in all of this with the guidance that they've provided, released a pandemic metric dashboard that allows us to help school divisions determine the risk level in their community and how that translates to opening schools. And so I'll jump to that next. This slide is actually from the CDC. This is the guidance that CDC put out in early October that helps school divisions think through when they should be considering in-person type activities. There are several metrics that we look at. In addition to this, the Virginia Department of Health has a school metrics dashboard that really looks at this data on a regional level and takes the school divisions through some even more intense metrics. But the CDC recommended 2 core metrics, and these 2 core metrics are the first 2 rows there. First is the number of new cases per 100,000 persons within the last 14 days, and that's an aggregate number of cases. And you can see there that if that number of cases is over 200 in that 14-day period, we consider that community to be in the highest risk of transmission in schools. And if that factor is less than 5, then they're in the lowest risk of transmission in schools. The second major core factor is percent positivity. And so RT-PCR tests that are positive during the last 14 days, greater than 10% is in the highest risk, less than 3% is in the lowest risk. And you can see there's some factors in the middle. But we ask our school divisions not just to look at the data, but to do an assessment of their ability to implement 5 key mitigation strategies before they open schools in person. And those 5 key strategies are the consistent and correct use of masks, social distancing to the largest extent possible. Of course, we recommend 6 foot of distancing between students and teachers at all times. But after looking at some research from the World Health Organization, we did say that if students were correctly and consistently masked, that could go to as low as 3 feet. I've been touring schools a lot over the past couple months. Most school divisions are implementing the 6 foot of physical distancing in classrooms. The third key mitigation strategy is hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. The fourth is the cleaning and disinfecting of the facility. And finally, we want to make sure that in those communities, they have strong contact tracing and collaboration with the local health department. And so you can see if all 5 strategies are correctly and consistently implemented, then that helps the school division move towards the lowest risk of transmission. And if they're not doing any of these things, they would be in the highest risk of transmission. So taking these 5 ratings, we align that to the governor's 3-phase plan, and I'll share that with you on the next slide. If a school division is in the highest risk category, we recommend that schools implement phase 1 recommendations. And as a reminder, phase 1 in the governor's plan is a recommendation that students be predominantly remote, but we do recommend that students with disabilities, due to the regression that they could face from not being in person, be allowed to come in person as long as it's deemed appropriate by the parents and it's appropriate in the IEP. Of course, all students should be served, all other students should be served remotely, but divisions may very well want to consider a fully remote option. But in that highest risk phase, we do ask school divisions to prepare that as their data gets better, to go into one of the other modalities. If the school division fell into that yellow or orange category, which we call moderate or high risk, we recommend that schools implement phase 2 recommendations, which is still predominantly remote for our students, but it does add English learners and pre-K through 3 students, our youngest learners, to students with disabilities as the priority for in-person learning. Obviously, we're targeting our most vulnerable populations in terms of students that need in-person instruction the most, and our youngest learners especially, due to the difficulty that young learners may face in a virtual-only setting. And so, again, all other students should be served remotely. And then finally, if a student falls into the lowest or lower risk category, the school division falls into the lowest or lower risk category, it is then that we recommend the phase 3 recommendations. And this is where we would like to see all students served, but we recommend that they still implement those key mitigation strategies, including that 6 foot of physical distancing and the wearing of masks. And because of the 6 foot physical distancing, most school divisions' classroom sizes do not allow every student to be in the room during that time. And so many schools have implemented what we call the hybrid schedule that I showed you on the slide before. And the most common hybrid schedule is that students in these settings go 2 days per week to reduce the class size by half to allow for the social distancing. And then the other 3 days a week, those students are remote. And it also requires a reduction in the number of students on buses to maintain this distancing. Most school divisions that are running transportation at this time are going with students being just about 1 to a seat. And so that takes a 55 passenger bus down to 20 to 25 students on a bus. And so a lot of logistical challenges our schools have had to work through to do that. Now, many of our school divisions already had really small class sizes, and many of them have had those key mitigation strategies working really well for them. And so some of our school divisions are going to school as much as 4 days a week with all students, as we shared on the slide. Now, we do recommend in phase 3, when the school division's at lowest or lower risk, that a remote learning option be provided to all students and staff, but especially those at highest risk of severe illness. And so even in our school divisions that are fully in person, that, as I mentioned on the map slide, Hanover County being one of those school districts, as much as 38% of students have chosen virtual, even in some of those settings that are more aggressively in person in this category. And so on the next slide, I want to talk through the challenges that school divisions have faced with implementing virtual learning. And so the slide on the right shows you the total number of devices needed to get to 100% of students having connectivity from home. We would need about 427,000 more computing devices for every student to be able to have a device at home. And so that you can see that amounts to about a $129 million price tag. We would also need about 124,000 more mobile hotspots to make sure that students had the access to the internet. And this is, of course, assuming that the broadband access can even get to the student's residence. And so you can see there's a price tag of about $31 million to do mobile hotspots for 6 months. If you do it for the entire year, there's a little bit of a cost break typically with the vendors. And so you can see about $43 million in costs to do the entire year. We did this study in May. And so many of our school divisions have used the Gear and Vision grants I will talk about later in the presentation. And this number has begun to whittle down. The map, though, shows you a heat map of, essentially the darker the blue shade, the more the percentage of students in that community do not have access to devices and hotspots. And so you can see pockets of dark blue in Southwest Virginia, pockets of dark blue in Southside Virginia, and then up into the northern neck and the southern part of Northern Virginia. And so recognizing the difficulties here, we have done an incredible amount of work to support school divisions in this space. Virtual Virginia has expanded significantly. When I get to the next slide, I'm going to go in a lot of detail on what we've done in Virtual Virginia, because I think you'll be really proud of how the Commonwealth and our school divisions have stepped up there. We have implemented what we call the Vision grants. Of course, the governor had $66 million in GEAR funding, which was the governor's discretionary fund as it relates to schools and higher ed. And then we had about $238 million in CARES funding, of which $23 million was set aside by the Department of Education for statewide activities. And from the governor's GEAR fund, we did, the governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, we did set aside originally $18 million and increased that to $29 million to support internet access, MiFis, and laptops, and have granted that money to school divisions to bridge this gap. Of course, we have continued to implement the e-learning backpack initiative and several other supports I'll talk about in future slides. But let me jump in just a little bit in a little bit more depth on Virtual Virginia. We have significantly expanded Virtual Virginia this year. You probably know Virtual Virginia as our statewide platform where the Department of Education, in partnership with Virtual Virginia, delivers synchronous instruction from teachers hired by Virtual Virginia to deliver virtual instruction. Our school divisions had been using that for many years, so we were well positioned with Virtual Virginia. And many high school students, even before the pandemic, were able to access Virtual Virginia for courses that couldn't be offered to them in their home high school. One of the biggest things that we did, and we took CARES and GEAR funding to do this, we have provided, as of the pandemic, a statewide learning management system for every school division in the Commonwealth. Many of our school divisions already had one, and they were allowed to continue using their own, the tools they were most familiar with. But now we can ensure that instructional content can be delivered in a virtual way in every school division in the Commonwealth. We think of a successful virtual program needing three major tools. We call it the three-legged stool. To have a successful virtual program, you must have a device for every student and teacher. You must have an internet access for every student and teacher, and you must have a way to deliver content. And so we have completely eliminated the need for the third leg of the stool with the statewide learning management system. We did that through Virtual Virginia. Virtual Virginia had a learning management system. We worked with their vendor using these CARES and GEAR funding to be able to make sure that every school could have that. That originally started where we implemented that for the remainder of last school year. We were able to continue that contract for this school year. You may recall that the General Assembly funded what we called the LEAP program, which was a statewide learning management system that we had requested even before the pandemic. Those funds were unallotted last year, but we were able to replace that with CARES funding to get this launched. But now that this has really become a core fabric of how we deliver instruction and the incredible skills our teachers have gained in delivering virtual instruction, it's going to be really important in the future that we seek funding to keep that learning management system going permanently. The good news is a lot of the startup costs that were in our original proposal have been handled, and so it will just be the ongoing cost from here. We have also expanded course content. Virtual Virginia, prior to the pandemic, was primarily a high school program. We now have expanded and created content that teachers and school divisions can use to teach their students in grades K through 12. So now you don't just have to be a high school teacher or a high school student to benefit from Virtual Virginia. All students in the Commonwealth can benefit from Virtual Virginia. In just a few weeks, we will also be releasing asynchronous course content so that school divisions can use Virtual Virginia and teach the courses completely offline if students don't have internet access. The learning management system works offline, and so all students would have to do is on some frequent basis, maybe once a week, go where there's an internet signal. And most of our school divisions have opened up their internet signal at their school so that it can be accessed from the parking lots. Upload and download the material for the week, and then go back home and completely learn using the course content that the Virginia Department of Education and Virtual Virginia have developed to be able to continue their learning even if they don't have internet access. Our school divisions have been doing a variety of activities to promote asynchronous learning. They've been sending packets home. They've been sending flash drives home. Many school divisions have been delivering flash drives by buses, but with this completely asynchronous content, we can move to where students can just receive that on their devices with an internet access. Louisa County has a really great story where they've created solar trailers that promote internet signal in grocery store parking lots. So families can actually just get their students' information uploaded and downloaded in Louisa County, as an example, just by driving to the grocery store. But we have all along, and even before the pandemic, taught synchronous courses from Virtual Virginia, where we teach students live using our teachers. We have basically used our CARES funding to double the number of enrollments so that any student, there are no wait lists anymore in Virtual Virginia. Any student that wants live instruction from one of our teachers can do that with the way that we created that structure this year. Now, throughout the pandemic, we knew we had significant issues with students having internet access, so we did launch Virginia TV Classroom. We partnered with every public media station in the state, and we're able to deliver live instruction on the TV on PBS stations. And because we were worried about our English language learners, especially our Spanish-speaking learners, being able to access instructional content if they didn't have an internet access or when we were closed in the spring, we did partner with 1380 AM Radio Poder to deliver Spanish language educational content. And even if you're not in the Richmond area where 1380 is from, they created an 800 number so that Spanish-speaking students could dial in and receive the Spanish-speaking instruction that was being delivered on the radio. So on the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit more about our Virtual Virginia programs that are going on beyond that. I won't repeat content. Of course, I mentioned the learning management system and our content that's available. We did launch just before the pandemic our Go Open VA repository, where the General Assembly passed a bill several years ago that allowed us to do open educational resources. And we launched an entire portal so that teachers can upload all of their content to be shared all over the state, remixed and reused throughout the Commonwealth. Again, our complimentary program now allows every teacher in the Commonwealth to access our over 100 courses that are taught by our Virtual Virginia teachers. So even if you don't want to use our Virtual Virginia teacher as the instructor, your teacher can take the courses that we've built and deliver them directly to students. But probably the biggest piece that we've done is because we have over a decade of experience in virtual learning, we have been doing significant professional development with our Virtual Virginia teachers to teach other teachers around the Commonwealth how to deliver instruction in a virtual setting. And we were able to do all this again with those CARES funds, and we used about $5.8 million to launch all this. I am excited to announce that as of last week, now 100% of our school divisions are using at least one of Virtual Virginia's programs in their school divisions. So next, I want to just brief you quickly on enrollment trends in the Commonwealth. Of course, you know that we collect enrollment data and make final calculations based on what we call the March 31 average daily membership. And this year in special session, you asked us not to make adjustments to those payments while we provide you data on what enrollment trends look like. We do collect enrollment trends on September 30th to help with our projections. And I can tell you we're going to release a full report on enrollment here in the next coming days, but we are seeing a decline in enrollment in most of our school divisions. The largest declines are in kindergarten. The Code of Virginia does allow students to defer their enrollment 1 year. And so over 12,000 kindergartners in the Commonwealth have decided to either do homeschool or defer their enrollment until next year. The total impact on enrollment is about a 38,000 student decline in enrollment. And so I'm sure as you work through the special session, General Assembly members were hearing several requests for a hold harmless to keep school division budgets whole, even while they're facing these enrollment declines. Of course, the General Assembly has already budgeted for those extra students. And so this is ultimately a policy decision the General Assembly has to make. But you could theoretically pass language that allows us to keep their enrollments whole and keep the ADM where they are. And with the projections that we've looked at, we see that as long as you keep the budget the same as it was as adopted in the special session, there would not be new money necessary to bring school divisions to that hold harmless. The funding for that 38,000 students is there. So the question that before the General Assembly in January will be whether to hold those school divisions harmless. We do have a few school divisions who are up in enrollment. And in those cases, as we look at our projections, we do believe that there's funding there even to handle the few school divisions that are up slightly. And so a little bit on staffing, because that's partly impacted by the need for social distancing, and that's on the next slide. We do have a significant number of our staff members who are at higher risk of severe illness and are having to teach virtually and cannot come to in-person setting. We have had a number of teachers fearing the COVID-19 pandemic that have accelerated their retirement timeline. We've had a teacher shortage, of course, all along, but over the past few years and even before the pandemic, we've seen growing shortages in special education with bus drivers, and we're starting to see that with support staff. And so our school divisions are challenged by staffing needs. And frankly, our school divisions, to implement the social distancing factors and allow teachers to teach from home that are at higher risk of severe illness are going to need more staff. Of course, the CARES Act funding of the $238 million, of which 90%, $215 million, went to school districts, will help with that. But it's important for the General Assembly to know that there are significant shortage issues. We collect shortage data as of October 30th every year. So in the coming weeks, we'll also be producing reports on exactly the impact of these shortages. And so just two more issues to brief in this section. We have been focused on, as we've opened school this year, a number of waivers. You can see here we've issued over 49 waivers and relief measures. So I want to thank you so much for that authority. It's allowed us to be extremely responsive to the pandemic, and we've been able to support school divisions in a timely manner. One of the main issues that school divisions are worried about is whether they can meet the 990 clock hour requirement each year. And so knowing that, school divisions in some cases are not open all days, in some cases they're not open all 5 days, knowing that we're going to continue to have inclement weather, what we've notified school divisions is they can qualify for a waiver of the 990 clock hour requirement, but we have not waived the requirement that they meet in elementary school 680 hours of core instruction, and in middle school 540 hours of core instruction, and at the high school they have to earn 140 hours for verified credits. And so our school divisions have created plans that maintain those core instruction hour requirements. And then we've also asked, and we have not waived the requirement, that they offer the other critical components of education, including CTE, fine arts, health, and PE. And so one of the waivers that you should know about is that we did waive accreditation for this school year. So the federal government is continuing the requirement that we issue the assessments. So the reading, the math, and the science assessments that we give in Virginia are mandatory at this time. But so knowing that we would give those assessments and the issues that schools are facing just responding to the pandemic and educating students, we did take the pressure off of teachers by waiving accreditation this year. But at this time, we have not waived assessments. Other waivers that you should know about, obviously, we've given them some funding flexibility. Graduation requirements continue to need flexibility, reporting requirements, other deadlines, flexibility in student health, teacher education licensure, and many, many others. And so all of this is ultimately to make sure that we are not allowing this pandemic to impact students' education. We can do what we need to move students to the next grade level as long as they're learning and on track, and move students towards graduation. And so finally, I'll just, again, brief funding. I've hit these a little bit as I've gone through the slides. $238 million was the ESSER fund. 90% of that money went directly to school divisions based on a Title I formula. 23 million was set aside for state use, and I described some of those activities today already. The governor had 66 million. 43 million of that went to K-12. The other 23 million went to higher education. And you can see we spent most of that on internet access, early childhood, that expansion of virtual Virginia, some of which came from ESSER, and of course, continuing work in our school nutrition programs. And then a big thank you to the General Assembly and the governor. Of course, there's the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and you just announced just a few weeks ago, $220 million additional that went to schools. And we did that on a per pupil basis of $175 per student. So that was a lot of information. I know I went through it quickly. I can go back anywhere that you would like. But I think that you should be proud that your Department of Education has worked diligently to support our school districts. We've been timely and responsive. We've kept up to date weekly with our superintendents to make sure that they have everything they need. We provided funding through the various channels here on the page to support our superintendents. And I can tell you that the education students are receiving today in our open setting this fall, even while many are virtual, is far superior to what we saw when schools were closed in the spring. So with that, I'll pause and answer questions from our General Assembly members. Delegate Avoli. I think you're muted, sir. I apologize.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good question for you, sir. Assuming and miraculously COVID goes away tomorrow, and with what has happened with virtual education, will students have an option in 2 years from now to do virtual education K through 12?
Well, I don't know that I can completely predict that, but I think the answer to that is yes. Of course, we have, through the General Assembly, the multi-division online provider, what we call it the MOP programs. Every school division, generally speaking, had a MOP before the pandemic. But, you know, just giving you my opinion, I think that many students have struggled with virtual learning, but there are many, many other students that have, frankly, seen their light bulbs turned on in this virtual learning. You know, and I've visited middle schools where they talk about the huge reductions in bullying. I've seen elementary schools where teachers have reported to me there were kids that never spoke in person in class, but are highly engaged in the virtual setting. I believe that we're seeing parents that are, seeing their students engage in schools in new ways. Now, I will tell you as an educator, I believe that in-person instruction is a better modality for students. And if this pandemic were to go away tomorrow, I would hope that the overwhelming majority of our students would go back to in-person settings. But I do believe that there are going to be students that will benefit from virtual learning, not just at the high school, but throughout our K-12 experience. And many parents are sharing that with us. So I do believe that this new virtual learning is a permanent fixture. I don't know that it will be for every student after the pandemic, but I believe that there will be a small percentage of our students that will benefit from this, and I think it will be a part of what we do well into the future. But I think the biggest thing that we've learned here is, as our teachers have gained these incredible skills in virtual learning, they're able to do what we call blended virtual learning, which is using the online platforms and the online tools to deliver their instruction, even with their in-person students, in a way that the virtual tools are making education more and more efficient. So again, I think that in-person is certainly our long-term goal post-COVID, getting students back into classrooms 5 days a week with their teachers, because we do think that's most impactful. But yes, I think that this is here to stay for many of our students.
Dr. Lane, if I may follow up one more with this, as my law colleagues often know, I always refer to myself as a recovering high school principal and a career in technical education. One of my huge concerns has always been the plight of the disadvantaged students and what is happening to them as we go through this. I know at the elementary level, you put your arm around a kid, it makes all the difference in the world. That distancing that we have today, the in-person environment, I'm very, very concerned about what the impact will be in the future of these kids in this generation here. Are we addressing that in any way from the state level at all? I know you all are concerned about it also. You have to be.
Absolutely. And I think when we get into our next presentation on special education and student services, I know that we plan to talk to you about some of the social emotional learning work that we've put in place. We have, through funding and through guidance and through tools, provided a number of supports for school divisions to think through how they can support not only the academic health of our students, and not only the physical health of our students with social distancing, but also the mental and emotional health of our students through this time. It is a trying time. In our guidance document, the 3R document I referenced, that our nearly 135-page guide to opening schools, we put social emotional learning and the mental health of students at the center of our work. I'm happy to tell you that pretty much every school division that I've implemented And it doesn't matter if it's Southwest Virginia to Northern Virginia to Richmond to Tidewater. We have seen the social emotional health of students to be a core component of how they're thinking about moving students forward. We have our counselors checking in with students. We have our teachers checking in with students, even if they're in the virtual setting, to make sure that we know what's going on in their lives and can support them. But I could certainly go into way more detail on that, but the answer to your question is absolutely a yes. This has been a core component of the way that we've approached responding to this pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Lane.
Dr. Lane, I see that Delegate Guy has her hand raised to ask a question.
Delegate Guy.
Thank you so much for your presentation. You touched on it very briefly. One of my gravest concerns is what this crisis has done to accelerate our teacher shortage. And I have two questions for you. One, I've been very frustrated in my efforts to try to get any comprehensive information about the volume of retirements and the volume of hiring, which is the gap we're worried about. Are you doing anything to collect that information? And if so, can you make it available to us so we can get our arms around how big this problem really is? And two, what suggestions do you have as a subject matter expert for us as legislators about how we're going to fix it?
Thank you for the question. The answer to your first question is yes, we do collect data on teacher shortages. The school divisions report that to us every year as of October 30th. And so essentially, that being 10 days ago, we're still in the collection process because that window of the time period just closed. And so probably by the end of the month, we will finish the collection of teacher shortages. And then we tend to report that and we'll certainly share it with the General Assembly members in December. The report does not necessarily target retirement specifically, so we're working diligently right now to survey school divisions in other ways. Later in the presentation, I think you'll hear about a requirement the board has asked us to do to qualify for the 990-hour waiver, and one of those is that school divisions must tell us on a quarterly basis how students are doing. That was, in waiving the 990 clock hour requirement, what we said is in lieu of that, you have to show us that students are moving forward. And so we're using those periodic reports to collect data that are not collected through normal channels. So as soon as we have all of that information, and I expect it to be in the coming weeks, we will certainly provide that to you. In terms of recommendations around teacher shortage, there are several, but I think that there's no replacement for the deep need that we have to increase salaries for teachers in Virginia. The salary issue that we're facing with teachers is significant, and we're seeing less and less college graduates or college students choosing to major in education because of the long-term outcome for earnings and the ability to raise a family on a teacher's salary. So that would be one area that unequivocally I would say is huge. Now, there are other things that we can do. The Board of Education in their presentation today is going to talk to you about teacher mentoring and recruitment and principal mentoring and recruitment and coaching. And what I can tell you is, whereas we do have a shortage issue in terms of the pipeline of people getting into the classroom, we also have a significant issue with teachers leaving the field after just a few years. And so we see that as a retention issue. And the board and their standards of quality, and they'll go into way more depth on this, put over $100 million in their recommendation that they promulgated to improve the work that we do in teacher coaching. And I think that is absolutely essential. When you survey teachers on why they leave the field, salary is at the top of the list, but at the very top of the list is the support that they felt like they got from their school principal. And so if we can improve the support that our principals provide, if we can improve the support that we give teachers through mentoring and coaching, I think that we can retain a whole lot more teachers. And I think that that's actually a faster strategy to eliminating the shortage than many others. And so those would be my top two recommendations. I can go into some others that I think would be impactful, but those would absolutely be essential.
Yeah, what I would like to see is a breakdown. I know from talking to my local divisions that if we keep them 5 years, we tend to keep them. So it's in the first 5 years that we lose a tremendous number of fledgling teachers. And so that would certainly address that. I would also like to know what recruitment issues we have. You know, when I was on the school board, we used to have pocket shortages of applicants. Now, in looking at websites for job openings, it looks to me like we got shortages across the board. Norfolk is one of my, not where I live, but it's one of the divisions I represent. A school board member shared with me yesterday that they have 60% of their teachers are at or above retirement age. So that bubble is coming at us like a train, and they've got posted openings for elementary school teachers, you know, which used to be the one place we never had to worry. So I would like to, do y'all collect data on, you know, how many openings there are across the state and in what areas? And, you know, because we really, it's not just a matter of seeing how many teachers retire, it's seeing how many teachers are in the pipeline to replace the teachers that are retiring. And I'm having a real hard time getting my arms around the magnitude of the problem. And I think we need to do that in order to effectively create the political will to move forward to take the steps you just talked about. I know teachers are underpaid, but you got to show people how absolutely dire it is so that they're going to prioritize it in the time when money's going to be really tight.
Thank you, Delegate Guy. Yes, we do provide that data each year, and we'll certainly provide this year's data as soon as we finish collecting it here in the coming weeks. But one thing I can tell you is, as part of that report, we actually share with you the top 10 critical shortage areas. And to give you a sense of how dire it is, just like you said, elementary teaching is now on the critical shortage list. And if elementary teaching is on the critical shortage list, you know that we have critical shortages across the board in every area. But absolutely, Delegate, we will provide that information to you as soon as it's prepared. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Dr. Lane, and thank you for that presentation. I was just wondering if you could speak briefly about our truancy rates, our chronic absentee rates that we might be seeing, especially with our most vulnerable student populations, and what the school divisions are doing to address those concerns.
Thank you. And I'll start, if you don't mind, by just explaining how we've thought differently about absenteeism this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and because not every student is in school every day, and not every student can even log in every day with their internet access. And so we basically provided flexibility for our school divisions this year to do a task-based accountability of absenteeism in addition to a time-based accountability. And so school divisions now can mark students present if they attend in person or attend their synchronous virtual learning sessions. But they can also consider students engaged in school and present if they're turning in their work in these, say, asynchronous settings or completely remote settings. And so many school divisions are using a variety of tools to determine student presence. And so that's one piece that's important to note, is that the way we're collecting that data just has to be different in the pandemic. But I can tell you that school divisions are reporting to us an uptick in absenteeism. There are a number of students, as you can imagine, that are transient from school division to school division in any time. Normally, that transiency is actually making it more difficult, where typically when a parent moves from one district to another, they immediately enroll in the next school division. We're seeing lags in the amount of time that parents are enrolling in the new school division when they're moving. And so divisions are reporting to us an uptick in the number of truancy cases. I have been working closely not only with our school divisions, but our court system, to make sure that we're being fair to families, but also making sure that parents understand that education is mandatory, and but at the same time, it has been really difficult for school divisions to work with some students, especially frankly some of our students in some of our higher poverty areas. Our school divisions are doing many great things in this space. You know, the strategies are wide and broad. It's everything from purchasing alarm clocks for students to make sure they wake up and are there on time, to you know, working with counselors and social workers and school psychologists to ascertain some of the root causes behind why students are not attending. And then, you know, frankly, one of the things I think our teachers have done a great job at is just making our school more engaging, even in this virtual setting, so that students want to come to school. You know, I hate to say this, but at least thus far this first quarter, without football and band and many of the things that get students really excited, you know, it's impacting their social and emotional health, which can impact their ability to attend. But to your question, absolutely, attendance issues are up, and certainly we've provided guidance and worked directly with school divisions that have reported issues to us to see how we can resolve those matters. And Delegate Mugler, I think I saw your hand.
You did. Hi. Thank you, Dr. Lane. Really terrific presentation this morning. I have several questions, of course, I always do, but the first one I wanted to address was kind of a piggyback on what Delegate Guy was talking about with respect to staffing, but something that we've seen in just recent past weeks is staffing problems related to reopening and the submission of medical waivers from a large number of teachers. I happen to represent 3 school districts, and 2 out of the 3 have had such significant medical waiver submissions that they cannot completely open. So are we looking at ways to address that particular issue?
Yes, and a couple things there. First, as I'm sure you agree with, we do not want to mandate any teacher come into the building that has a severe medical issue that could impact them during this time and put them at higher risk of severe illness. And so it's one of the reasons Virginia was one of the fastest states to get our CARES money out to school districts. You know, obviously, many school divisions have used the CARES money to hire additional staff, especially staff to focus on in-person learning because so many teachers have had to go virtually. One of the other things that school divisions have had to do is they've had to limit the number of students that could come in person based on the staffing challenges. And so ultimately, I think that this is primarily a funding and staffing issue. If a number of our teachers have to teach virtually, and certainly that's protected under FMLA, then our school divisions are either going to have to increase staffing to be able to support the students that are ready to come in person, assuming their modality is in person, and they're going to have to increase the number of spaces that they use. So our school divisions have done many things in the spacing, from a spacing standpoint, to provide that flexibility. But ultimately, you know, school divisions budgeted for the number of teachers that they needed in a normal time. Any support that the General Assembly can provide in salary and staffing is going to be welcomed by the school divisions because it's going to allow them to hire more staff to fill those vacancies. And recognizing that it's temporary staff, and we provide a lot of flexibility for temporary staff to support some of these things. We've seen a lot of creative things. I was in Southwest Virginia on a tour recently. There was a teacher's aide that was monitoring students in the classroom while a teacher was teaching from home virtually. And so it's taken a lot of creativity, but ultimately it comes down to whether their budget can support additional staffing to make that possible.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. 2 other quick questions. One was with respect to the e-learning backpack. You talked about the expansion of that, and I just was curious about exactly how you're expanding that. Have you sort of changed the parameters of how you choose divisions that are eligible for that?
No, but we've had several school divisions that qualified for e-backpack, that e-learning backpack, that did not accept the funding in the past, and now they're accepting the funding.
Okay, great. And the last thing I had was just with regard to the parking lot access, which is a fantastic idea for downloading content and the delivering of flash drives. And I was just curious about the parking lot access. When you will have that, or when school divisions do have that, do they have people on site to assist if folks are having difficulties with that downloading process?
Not always. These new internet tools that they've put either on the top of their buildings or in the parking lots of grocery stores, all these ideas that I've shared, those units are operating 24 hours a day. And so, you know, theoretically, a parent may choose not to grocery shop until 10 o'clock at night because they feel like it's safer and there's less people in the grocery store. And so they may drive by the school on the way home and do the upload and download thing. And so there's not always people on site, but in every one of our school divisions during regular business hours, there are significant supports where parents can call in and get support or even drop by the school. So not 24 hours a day, but certainly during business hours, I think that's available to parents.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. I was thinking of some sort of even like hotline type thing, but that's good to know. I mean, I think we're doing all that we can to help people gain access. Thank you.
Thank you. Senators and delegates, any other questions in this section before we transition to the next section? Okay, great. So Emily, if you'll bring our slides back up. The next section is going to be on special education and student services. And I'm going to turn it over to our assistant superintendent in this area, Dr. Samantha Hollins. Dr. Hollins.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lane. Good morning, DOE staff, Virginia Board of Education, and representatives from the General Assembly. I'm so pleased to be with you here today. As you can imagine, given the conversation we've had already this morning, but most particularly some of the questions and concerns have been raised, the work of the department to support school divisions across the Commonwealth has not only been around the provision of quality instruction, but has also been around making sure that students with disabilities, as well as students that require specialized instructional support and services to be successful, have also been able to pivot and be dynamic in this changing time. And so I want to start today by offering just a little bit of context for some of the additional supports and services that we have offered through the Department of Education, but particularly through the Department of Special Education and Student Services. And so I want to talk first about our response to COVID-19. As many of you have already pointed to, there have been concerns beyond the kind of day-to-day instruction and academic supports for students. The department has been working as soon as schools closed in March to provide updated guidance and technical assistance to school divisions. And as you can imagine, this technical assistance and support has been nowhere needed more than with our parents, families, and caregivers. I'm sure many of you that have children, grandchildren, or serve as caregivers for some of our students have realized the immense pressure that this has put on our families across the Commonwealth. And so the department has really been able to engage with our families, as well as provide targeted resources and assistance to help support this and to help support them during this time. And so we've developed a lot of guidance around specific populations, particularly our students with disabilities. As you can imagine, the work of providing those specialized instruction and support looks a little bit different virtually, but also has an impact on opportunities for teams to meet and discuss student performance and areas of need that have been identified, particularly after the school closures in the spring. And so the department has worked to prepare a very specific guide for parents of students with disabilities to really help them work through this process, as well as providing targeted support to school divisions to help them be more responsive to the challenges being experienced by this specific population of students. We've also worked to create some very quick and easy resources for our families, including what families need to know during COVID-19, as well as a frequently asked questions document that they can access. We've also been working to support our teachers. As you can imagine, for students that struggle academically, for students who are English language learners, for students who are from populations that might be experiencing extreme challenge and stress during this time, like our military-connected students, as well as our students with disabilities, really require a little bit of a more unique lens to how virtual instruction or the provision of remote instruction can look. And so we've really been working to support teachers, paraprofessionals, and our specialized instructional support staff on how best to work with these populations and really be poised to support them day in and day out. And as you can imagine, that's just not for our teachers and administrators, but for our school counselors, our school psychologists, our school social workers, and our school nurses become really part of that wraparound support network to students. And so we have upped our ability to touch base with them in the field, and we've held weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly calls with various groups of those folks so that we're hearing directly from them and able to provide contextualized supports that they're requesting and answer really important questions, as well as just the challenges that they may be facing, everywhere from Tidewater to Northern Virginia to far Southwest Virginia. As Dr. Lane stated earlier, the department has been very rapid in our response in providing additional resources, particularly through CARES and GEAR Act funding. And as he stated, a lot of this funding has been directly supportive of student social, emotional learning and development. And so we realized during this time, it's not just about learning about those core instructional components, it's really about providing supports to students and really making sure that we're supporting our education professionals as they work in these different environments. And so we've been able to dedicate direct funding to serve students with disabilities across the Commonwealth, and that funding was directly allocated to each school division based upon the number of students with disabilities that they currently have, as well as identified areas of funding for social emotional learning support and school-based mental health services. And we have seen such a great use of these resources already by our local school divisions. Everything from developed social emotional learning screening tools to pick up on issues and areas of concern that our students and families might be facing, as well as to help staff additional school mental health providers within the educational setting. And so hiring an extra school counselor or having an extra school psychologist or decreasing some of those ratios in order to provide support to students has been just a few examples of how divisions have utilized their funding to date. We continue to work directly with them, as well as amping up our resources that are available online and on demand for these providers at the state level. So everything from a toolkit for school counselors to see, hey, what does a more frequent touch base virtually look like for students who are struggling, to helping our school nurses think through some of the healthcare guidance and tools that they might need, as well as providing support for personal protective equipment to some of our more vulnerable student populations. We've also taken a unique role in ensuring that our local school divisions are up to date with any guidance and information that's coming from the U.S. Department of Education. And I'm happy to report that we've worked very closely with our partners in the Office of Special Ed Programs to ensure that while there have been no waivers to the requirements of IDEA, meaning that every student in the Commonwealth identified with a disability is still being afforded the protections and services of that act, really helping everything from IEP teams meeting virtually to helping divisions talk about compensatory services that may be required as a result of the closures in the spring. It's really been a privilege to work with the Secretary of Education as well as our Board of Education members to make sure that we've got our ear to the ground, hearing what practitioners have needed and being able to be responsive to that, whether it be resources around a specific topic, whether it be professional development and technical assistance, or whether it just be an ear to talk to and work through a situation that's happening on the ground. I also want to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the ongoing work in the Department of Special Education and Student Services. We're always busy in SDSS, but it definitely has seemed even more so. Obviously, many of you are very well aware of some of the areas of legislative action that we've been responsive to, and I've provided a little bit of update here just on some of those items that we think might be really important for you all as you enter into the session, but obviously have communications with stakeholders as well. We are very excited about our work about the development of statewide social emotional learning standards. If you think about this, it's really like the SOLs for SEL, really how are we communicating the priorities around social emotional learning? And it's just been such a pleasure to work with divisions who are a little bit further down this road and those who are very interested in kind of getting on the on-ramp and really helping to provide support to them, but also be very clear about this as a priority from the Virginia Department of Education on really having that wraparound support of students that go above and beyond academic supports. We're also very excited by the end of this calendar year, we'll be able to release our guidance around transgender student model policies. And this has been the result of many months of work and many engaging and amazing conversations with stakeholder groups, many of which have had student representatives and young adults from around the Commonwealth. And I will say on behalf of myself and our staff, we have learned so much and the value that has been created in having these conversations. I think you will see shine through this model guidance. And I think it'll be very helpful to our school divisions in really thinking about how to support their students and really thinking about their approach to inclusivity on a systemic level. Obviously, the department works on literacy initiatives, and as Dr. Lane will tell you, this is one of the things that he is very concerned with making sure that every student in the Commonwealth has access to quality reading instruction and is able to really show progress and development in this area. And we work across the agency on improving literacy instruction. And much of this work has really benefited from some updated research and guidance that has been in the field. And so we continue to work with local school divisions, as well as our partners in higher education, to ensure that the tools, resources, and instruction that school divisions have available is based on the evidence-based approaches and the science of reading. And so we're working continually with our partners on the phonemic awareness literacy screener and updating that piece of information that many of our school divisions use in order to kind of sample what their student skills and development looks like. But then also working with targeted group of supporters like our dyslexia advisors that are located in each one of our school divisions to ensure that they have access to the latest and greatest research and development around literacy, everything from rapid automized naming to different screening tools that can be available to ensure that each and every student is receiving quality reading instruction and can be identified to make sure that if they're experiencing challenges or a lack of success in that area, how can we kind of support that work and work really well to support our teachers in knowing what evidence-based approaches to literacy look like. We've also been really excited to work with a variety of different partners over the last year to 18 months. I mentioned that we maintain a close relationship with our federal partners, particularly from the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. Virginia received a monitoring visit, which is pretty typical of what states go through, particularly in special education, back in May 2019. And in June 2020, we were provided with the report for that, and we continue to work with our federal partners. That report identified some issues around procedure and practice and policy, and so it's really given the department an opportunity to be responsive to updating many of those policies and practices that have impacted some of our dispute resolution options, and I think really just brought us up to speed with where we want to be in 2020 and being responsive to specific complaints, particularly from individuals, families, advocates around special education. We've also been very pleased to work with the General Assembly's Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission over the last year. As many of you know, in December, they're planning to release a study that they have done across the state on special education. And the department, I think, is really excited about the constructive recommendations that we'll see through that process. And we've also been at the table for other discussions in other areas that impact our provision of specialized instruction supports to students across the Commonwealth. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to be at the table and to have constructive conversations, but most importantly, to link up individuals with folks out there in the field, our central office leaders, our principals, and our teachers doing this work day in and day out. So at this point, I want to be responsive to time, and I'm going to pause. We do have an opportunity. I'm happy to answer any specific questions regarding the work in special education and student services. But as always, myself, as well as the staff at my department, is available to answer any specific inquiries, or if you'd like a little bit more of a detailed update around any of the pieces of legislation, we're happy to provide that. Thank you, Dr. Lane.
So again, members of the General Assembly, we are available for questions in this area. Delegate Avoli.
Dr. Hollins, a real quick question for you, just out of curiosity. In the IEP component, have there been modifications to the IEP, and what about implementation based on where we are today with special ed kids?
That's a great question, Delegate Avoli. There have actually not been any changes to the requirements around an individualized education program for students with disabilities. So Virginia is still in the process of meeting those federal and state requirements, meaning that the meetings are required, the provision of services are required, and most importantly in Virginia, our parental consent provision remains in play. And so while there have been no changes to the requirements around IEPs, we really have been flexible in how we've worked with school divisions to enable them to provide support to students with disabilities. As you can imagine, the provision of virtual education for many of our students with disabilities looks really different than for our neurotypical students. A great example is helping a local school division secure some additional software for a student with visual impairments to be able to access online educational opportunities in a way that is much more accessible for them. And so we have really worked to identify everything from those kind of one base constituency issues from school divisions, but most importantly have worked around our guidance to ensure that while teams know that everything is still required, how to make some changes and be flexible in the current environment to, for example, allow parents to participate in their IEP meetings virtually, how to update and report progress to students when they're participating in remote learning instruction. And so we have definitely had to be flexible, but the great news is that that high quality and high standard for providing education for students with disabilities has not changed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I apologize. I don't see anybody. And so we have one more section of a briefing from the department. We just obviously have been responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we also have at the Department of Education the work that we do to support schools even when we're not responding to the pandemic. And so wanted to give you an update on some major areas that I know have been focal points for the General Assembly. And the first is early childhood care and education. So as you know, we have begun the process of the multi-phase plan to transition child care quality and professional development and the Head Start State Collaboration Office from VDSS to VDOE. We have executed a memorandum of agreement for Virginia's quality initiatives for the Child Care Block Grant and began that MOA effective July 1, 2020. The Board of Education in the coming months will begin recruiting for their advisory committee, which will serve as Virginia's Early Childhood Advisory Committee in the next few months. We've also obviously been providing a number of briefings in this area for you, but what I can say first is a thank you to the General Assembly for bringing a focus to early childhood care and education to the Department of Education with these expansions. We are excited about this expansion. We're prepared for this. The transition plan, which we've submitted to the General Assembly, is very detailed. A huge kudos has to go to Jenna Conway for leading this work. But we see early childhood as one of our significant equity initiatives. We know that there's an achievement gap on the first day of kindergarten, and if we're ever going to get to a truly equitable system of education in Virginia, we have to start earlier. And the work that you've done to transition quality and programs to the Department of Education is going to be so important to making that possible. Just a couple other things that we have going on. This is actually a somewhat brief update because we did want to focus on COVID. I want to talk about some of our equity work. In addition to the equity work that I just mentioned in early childhood, we have been rolling out a number of tools to support equity and how school divisions can be more inclusive in their approach to education. We developed our roadmap to equity and created what we call, I know you know the 5 C's of instruction, right? Which are critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, and citizenship. We have created the 5 C's of Ed Equity VA, which focuses on everything from cultural relevance to compassion for students to reframing curriculum. And so just a really cool set of tools that Leah Walker, who's on the call, can go into way more detail if you have questions to support districts in creating equitable learning environments. We did have our Equity Summit virtually. That was our first conference we've ever had at the Department of Education. It was 100% virtual, and it was incredible. Leah's team has been leading an ongoing webinar series, frequently on topics to support districts in their equity work. We will have Ed Equity VA Week, the first week of December, and during that week, we will announce the Mary Peak Award winners for excellence in education equity to highlight some of the great work going on in equity in our schools. Of course, we had the African American History Education Commission that made a number of recommendations in professional development and for our standards to improve instruction, to tell a deeper and more rich history of African Americans, because African American history is American history. And I'm pleased to say that the board took all of their technical amendments, with the exception of just a small handful, and I'll describe those in a minute, and immediately implemented them into our curriculum framework so that this deeper and richer history can be told in our classrooms right away. There were a couple of items that were not related specifically to African American history that were recommended by the commission, and we start in January the full review of the standards for the 2022 review, so that we can implement this deeper and richer history permanently in the standards, in addition to the work that we did in the framework immediately. At the Department of Education, we've been doing equity training in partnership with VCU for the leadership team at DOE to support the work that, we believe that professional development in diversity, equity, inclusion is going to be essential in our school divisions. We wanted to model that with the leadership at the DOE. And so all year long, at least once per month, we've been working with VCU on diversity, equity, and inclusion training for our team so that we can be a model for the rest of the state. And I know VCU plans to take the training they've been doing with us to school divisions as well. Of course, Dr. Hollins mentioned some of this as well. The department has been a part of 3 JLARC studies at the same time throughout the pandemic, which I will say has been a lot of work, but we were pleased to see the first JLARC report released last month. If you read the report or even saw the presentation, the report was overwhelmingly positive about the management of the agency, but definitely gave us some things to work on, especially in diversity and school improvement and in teacher recruitment and retention. And so we're taking that report seriously. We're beginning to implement strategies. We're putting in budget proposals to address the areas where they said we needed more funding. And so all of that work is moving forward. Of course, next week, the report will be released on the Office of Children's Services, which is about private day placement students. And Dr. Hollins mentioned that in December, the JLARC study on special education in a more broad sense will be released. And we will certainly take all of those seriously and do everything we can to correct anything that we need to improve on. We take the quality of the services that we provide at the Department of Education very seriously, and we're glad to see JLARC be generally and overwhelmingly positive while giving us some things that we can definitely improve on. So that is a few other things going on at the department. I'll pause there, and then after our next question and answer session, we will be turning it over to the Board of Education to do their briefing. Any questions on some of the other initiatives going on at the agency? Delegate Evoli.
Okay. First of all, the early childhood education has been a real big initiative of mine. I'm so proud of the Commonwealth of Virginia to begin a prevention process. I remember I used to say as a high school principal all the time, once I got them to the high school without it, Band-Aids, Band-Aids. Let's prevent the issues that come about. And this is a really wonderful initiative, and I'm proud of the General Assembly and all involved to be in a leadership with this. Dr. Lane, secondly, I have a deep spot in my heart for career and technical ed, coming from some of that background. I'm curious as to what's happening with career and technical ed with some of our school divisions who are totally virtual. The quality of life for us is provided by plumbers when you need them, carpenters, electricians, and everyone else. I'm curious, what is happening statewide with these kids that I have a deep feeling in my heart for?
Yeah, thank you for the question on career and technical education. In a broad sense, before I talk about what's happening at the school level, I will share with you that during the last year since I've briefed the General Assembly, the board has approved the new Perkins 5 plan for Virginia, which will significantly increase funding in CTE over the coming years from the federal government. And as part of that, they created a fund for statewide initiatives for the first time out of that Perkins funding. And so I want to thank the board for that. Obviously, in our school divisions that are predominantly remote and virtual, CTE education is difficult to implement. CTE at its heart is hands-on. It's about working directly with real in-person live experiences. But for our high school students that need credits in that areas, those courses are continuing, even if they're virtual. I have visited several school divisions that are doing in-person instruction, and they're having to do more spacing, they're having to wear masks, they're having to be more careful with COVID-19, but programs are moving forward. One of the things that we're working on at the state level is we're obviously going to have to provide flexibility as it relates to work-based learning experiences. Frankly, employers, whereas they're normally really open to having students do internships and other things, because of the physical distancing and working from home and teleworking that's going on, we're seeing a little bit more reticence there. So at the state level, we're actually working right now on developing a proposal to build more simulation type activities so that we can build some virtual experiences that are a little bit more hands-on to support students in those areas. We're not completely finished vetting that. We're working closely with Megan Healy in the governor's office on some potential funding there. But we believe if we can develop some of these virtual modules and simulation type activities, this is not only something that will benefit us in COVID-19, it will benefit us long into the future so that students in rural areas that may not have certain businesses might be able to access some of these opportunities. So a lot of work going on in that space too, but I will say that the hands-on nature of CTE has made it challenging. And I think that compares to band as well. Wind instruments with the way that that's played, there are a lot of challenges in those spaces, but we're doing everything we can to mitigate those as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. I know yesterday we just saw the report released from VCU School of Ed as well as Penn State highlighting the deep-seated segregation that still exists in many of our school divisions, and the fact that it's actually been increasing in the last few decades. I know we haven't had a chance, all of us, to really digest that information, and I know that you and so many folks in the Department of Ed have been working on this issue for quite some time, and I really appreciate those efforts towards equity. Can you just highlight in terms of what the report's findings have revealed, what some next steps might be, what we can do legislatively to move the needle forward in this very critical area? If we're really going to be serious about equity in the Commonwealth, how can we begin to make some changes in these next few years?
Yeah, thank you. So as Senator Hashmi said yesterday, VCU, led by a team, I think from Dr. Genevieve Siegel-Hawley, released a report on segregation, resegregation, desegregation in schools in the Commonwealth. I did get a preview of it, so I have a little bit more than 24 hours notice, but we're still taking a look at it as well. But basically what it says is that there are significant issues within school divisions where you may see schools of 95% students in poverty in one school and another school with 4% of students in poverty in the same school division. And so the report highlights some of the issues around equitable student placement in schools. But the report also highlights that not only are school boundary issues within schools highlighting some of the segregation that has happened between students, boundaries between school divisions is impacting that. And in these cases, it's actually more seriously segregated by race. I mean, you can even just think right here in the Richmond area, a much higher percentage of African-American students, even though it's a smaller number of students compared to the larger districts around it, because it's a smaller school district than, say, Henrico and Chesterfield, a higher percentage of students that are African-American are going to schools in Richmond and Petersburg than by percentage you see in the communities that surround them, Prince George, Chesterfield, Henrico, Hanover. And so what we're seeing is that there are, especially surrounding cities, the boundary line issues between school districts that create this. And then within school districts, especially our larger school districts, you're seeing that because of the more traditional neighborhood approach to assigning students to schools, that pockets of higher poverty schools are going to school together, and pockets of communities that have higher wealth are going to school together. And inherently in that, there are also racial segregation issues that are happening there. And so in terms of policy, I will tell you, I've had significant conversations with the Secretary of Education. He sees this as a primary initiative. And so I think that you'll see the policy office and the governor's office thinking about initiatives that they can recommend. I can't speak to any of those today, obviously, until the governor makes those type of decisions, or the secretary. But then, I've had initial conversations, and I think that we're just starting this conversation with the board around some of the constitutional opportunities that they have to address here, because they do talk about boundary lines in the Constitution. And so a lot to think about here, and it's certainly something that we know will have huge impact. At the end of the day, all students benefit from diversity in their schools, right? The research is clear that diverse schools improve student outcomes. And what we're seeing is that we have schools that are either predominantly African-American or predominantly Caucasian in our schools, and those schools could benefit from more diversity, and we think that our school divisions in the Commonwealth would be better for it. We also know that these boundary lines between schools and between divisions are also leading to schools not being accredited. When you group a large percentage of high poverty students in one school, that school is more likely to not be accredited than a school that is predominantly students of wealthier means. And so that's what we know about the report now. It didn't go into great detail on recommendations. It had some recommendations, but my understanding from Dr. Siegel-Hawley is that there is going to be a longer report produced in the coming months that will go deeper into recommendations. We'll be looking forward to that while we develop our own and do our own study on the issue.
Dr. Lane, do you mind if I say something about this?
Please, sir.
Might be responsive to the question. Senator Hashmi, this is something that the board has looked at, for a few years, but you asked specifically about legislation. The Virginia Constitution, as James alluded to, gives the board the power to divide the Commonwealth into school divisions, subject to such criteria as the General Assembly shall set. And unfortunately, the General Assembly has set criteria such that the power to divide the Commonwealth into school divisions has been basically nullified, because you require permission and basically the acquiescence of each of the divisions, impacted. And so one of the things, if I were in the legislature, I would be looking at is what criteria have we set out with regard to the power. If you want to look at it, is Article 8, Section 5, Sub A of the Constitution. What have we done to limit the power to divide the Commonwealth into divisions that will, most promote higher quality education for all? And as I said, the first thing I would look at is, the ability of the divisions themselves to veto. I remember well back in 2004, give or take, we had talked about actually merging Chesterfield and Petersburg with the idea of improving the administration and providing, higher quality schools and mixing the schools in a way that would improve outcomes for both. That actually was shot down by Petersburg, interestingly enough. They did not want anybody coming in and dealing with their schools. And under the current rules, they had the ability to basically say, absolutely no. The second thing, the intra-division issue is a little bit more difficult. And it is, again, something we have started to look at. I've had some preliminary talks with the people up at the Curry School about really statistical measurements for determining whether a division has in fact divided itself with school district boundary lines in a way that is, promotes the result of equitable pairing. And, unfortunately, we have yet to, well, due to time and other things, come up with not only the accurate measure, but also the enforcement mechanism. But that is something that we will work toward as the board moves on with its equity work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions in this area? All right. Well, General Assembly members, I am excited to turn it over to our board president, Dan Gecker, and our vice president, Dr. Jamel Wilson.
I guess if we have a PowerPoint, then we have a presentation. Is the way this all works. I am reminded an hour and a half into this of, one of my old teachers used to say, the mind can absorb no more than the seat can endure. So if those of you without your cameras on, I'm assuming you're standing by this time. Those of you with your cameras on, I will take no offense if you decide to stand up and take a quick stretch break. We've been going at this a long time. I am delighted to have with me, Dr. Jamel Wilson, Vice President of the Board. And I thank all of you for taking the time, to allow us to present to you what we think is important going forward. I usually don't start this way, but I ought to say that because my personality is such that I want to fix problems. And so I tend to focus on what needs to be fixed more than what we're doing right. Dr. Lane covered a lot of what we're doing right. I would say, 85% of what we do, we're doing pretty well. And what you're going to hear today in terms of the direction of the board is really focused on that remaining 15 to 20% that, we believe we can do better. Can you flip the slide? I don't have control over this, so. Thank you. In 2017, the Board of Ed, which by the way, has become, one of the hardest working and most committed boards in the Commonwealth. Our current 7 members do an awful lot of work. We are a very actively engaged and working board. But we adopted our comprehensive work plan. And we wanted to focus on 3 areas. The plan, by the way, goes for 5 years. And the 3 items that we wanted to focus on, and those are the priorities, but the items of focus are equity in our schools, teachers and building leadership, and accountability. And we began to work, we formed the committees, and we began to do work on what do we mean by equity, how do we accomplish equity. And for the board, the idea of equity is that we provide the resources necessary to have each child reach their maximum potential. Teachers in building leadership ought to be obvious, and accountability we will get to. Go ahead and go to slide 2, because we're going to talk around this when we hit the SOQs. I am a lawyer by training, and I tend to go back to sort of source documents. And so you will forgive me if for a minute we talk a little bit about the source of the board's power and how the General Assembly and the board interact. Most of you know that, I hope all of you know that in 1971, Virginia adopted a new constitution. In that constitution, power was given to the board, in fact, the requirement to the board that we prescribe standards of quality for each biennium, from time to time is the actual language, subject to revision only by the General Assembly. In his commentaries on the Virginia Constitution, Dick Howard, who was chair of the committee that wrote the Constitution, says the following: the Board of Education has a role which it must play, and the General Assembly has a role which it may play in setting standards of quality. The board prescribes the standards, but the Assembly, if it chooses to exercise the power, can make the ultimate decision as to what those standards should be. The Assembly decides not only whether to exercise the power, but also what procedure it wants to adopt and review the board standards. From 71 through give or take 82, the Board of Education actually did biannually adopt or prescribe standards of quality. And the legislature in each of those times chose to make minor modifications and kept the standards of quality as uncodified, indicating to everybody that they were intended to be temporary, not part of the code forever, and would be likely changed in the next biennium. In 1984, the legislature took the step of codifying the SOQs, thus sort of changing the historic practice and really the constitutional practice of how the standards got done. And you also passed statutes essentially calling for the board to make recommendations with regard to changes as opposed to actually prescribing changes. In 2019, for the first time in over 20 years, the board followed its constitutional mandate and actually prescribed standards of quality. There were 2 bills carried that had the board's prescribed standards in them, fully. One by Senator McClellan and the other by Delegate Aird. Neither of them really made it up through the money committees. We recently, by the way, re-prescribed those same standards of quality that we did in 2019, and we look forward to this General Assembly session and an opportunity to talk with all the members about what we believe is important and why we believe changes ought to be made. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? All right, everybody always wants to jump to the money slide. However, I'd like to talk instead of about the money, but about the policy changes that the board's prescribed standards of quality represent. And I think James alluded to this, a little bit. As I said, the board, before it prescribed in 2019, did a fair amount of work looking at different studies, talking to stakeholder groups, all the things that committees do to reach consensus and conclusions. And, honestly, we started off with the idea that if we were going to achieve equity in our schools, we would have to provide, the greater social service wraparound and other direct services to those places which were currently underserved. But where we ended up was with really what should not have been a startling conclusion, which is that the most important thing we have teaching, in the buildings with our children are the teachers. And that if we want to improve the outcomes, honestly, we're going to have to focus on both teachers and building leadership, meaning principals. Just to give you some statistics, in 2018-19, it was clear that inexperienced and provisionally licensed teachers were concentrated in Virginia's high poverty schools. High poverty schools have an average of 7.2% inexperienced teachers, that is, teachers in their first year of teaching, and 10.3% provisionally licensed teachers. Contrast that with low poverty schools, which have an average of 4% inexperienced teachers and 6.3% licensed teachers. It has been suggested in the research that up to 25% of the variance in test scores can be attributed to differences in teacher quality. Research indicates that being taught by a teacher in the top quartile of effectiveness for 4 consecutive years would actually eliminate the achievement gap between Black and white students. In the Commonwealth, Black students are nearly 2 times to be likely assigned an ineffective teacher and half as likely to be assigned the most effective teachers. These inequities are reflected within different schools in single divisions and across school divisions. What the Equity Fund, which is the first item of the slide here, would do is provide resources for poor divisions to attract experienced teachers or use those funds to reduce class size. It would actually mandate that the funds be used either, as I said, number one, to attract more experienced teachers or to reduce class size. A student in an unaccredited school in the Commonwealth is twice as likely to have a first-year teacher or a teacher teaching outside their endorsed area than a teacher in an accredited school. It's clear that we need to change the mix and have some redistribution. And the Equity Fund proposal proposes to do that by, as I said, providing those additional funds to poorer divisions to make those changes. Delegate Guy had mentioned or had asked questions about teacher retention, excuse me, and recruitment. I'd like to address just a few of those things now. In terms of statistics, Delegate Guy, if you take a look at the annual report from 2019 from the Board of Education, you'll see a fair number of statistics dealing with where we are. You can also look to a report done by the Curry School in 2017 in conjunction with the Advisory Committee on Teacher Shortages to get some fairly good data. it has been suggested, and I think accurate, that we can reduce significantly the shortage by improving teacher retention. And I think Delegate Guy mentioned that, it is clear that if you keep them for 5, you get to keep them, but you tend to lose a fair number before 5. One of the most significant reasons people leave the profession, according again to the Curry School study, is that they feel the lack of support. One of the other SOQ prescriptions would be the provision of a mentoring program for younger teachers with the goal of keeping them in the buildings and keeping them in the profession. There you go. Thank you for flipping the slide. In addition, there's a significant positive correlation between quality of building leadership and student outcome. We would provide for principal mentorship. I'm not going to go over all of these. I know we've been doing this a long time and we've got 15 minutes left. But you can see essentially where the focus of the prescribed standards of quality is. I know last year, the legislature increased the at-risk add-on, and we think that's great. I don't really care if you name the equity fund at-risk add-on, but my key takeaway for this is that we would like you to change the focus of the use of the money to the acquisition of higher quality teachers in poor areas, that is, more experienced teachers in poor areas. Okay, you can move on with the slides. And all right, this is just the obligatory financial slide showing sort of the distribution. Zach, you could probably speak to this better than any of us, since I think this was your slide in the early days. You can flip right past this one. Okay. As I said, our board is committed to equity. We believe that equity comes first from the change in structure of public education funding. And we believe that the prescribed SOQs would provide that measure of equity. We seek to prioritize equity in every facet of the public education system, and that includes, as we just mentioned, redistricting. And we want to ensure, as said here, that Virginia students learn all history, not just the currently taught history. And the board has taken steps recently, as Dr. Lane mentioned, to adopt the suggestions from the African American History Education Commission. You can flip the next one. Okay. Dr. Lane also mentioned we're going to go through the history and social science standards. You can move on to the next one because that's been covered. Okay, this one, 20 plus years ago, there was a major shift in accountability. The SOL assessments came in, and honestly, although there has been a lot of criticism of the accountability system at that time and the use of SOLs for this purpose, the truth is, I think that the underlying theory of that framework of accreditation was a good one. That is, we need to be able to measure what people are doing in order to find out where improvements are needed and help guide those improvements. I think, in 2000, I guess a couple of years ago, our board instituted a new system of accreditation based much more significantly on growth than the previous system was. I think that the board believes that one of the mistakes made with the SOL-based system was that they didn't go back fairly early after its adoption and look at what things were going well and what things were going poorly. That is, I believe strongly that they could have, over time, tinkered with the SOA in order to improve it without having some of the negative consequences and significant negative consequences we've seen over the last 20 years. This board has chosen to form a committee to review the new SOA, and that committee has been very active, so that we can catch early on those areas where we're doing well and frankly fix those areas where we're seeing unintended consequences from those standards. This is there's no action by the legislature needed on this. I just thought you ought to know that this work with regard to changes in the SOA is ongoing. You know, it's also interesting that during COVID, we've sort of waived accreditation because we have no baseline measures. And, you know, so some of those things we won't know until we get back to a more normalized school situation. However, I will say that even to date, the feedback we've gotten from various participants in our meetings, including, you know, a fair number of division superintendents, has been very helpful. And I do believe that there will be changes made or minor adjustments made as we move forward. Okay, next slide. Upcoming, you know, Dr. Lane talked about, you know, we now have early childhood education that will come in full force. Senator Lucas and I were on a committee to deal with gifted education admissions that has not resulted in, but certainly informed some of the work of the recently adopted revisions to the gifted education regulations by the board. And we appreciate that work. So that that's not too unclear. There was a lot of work done with regard to admissions at TJ in particular and the governor's schools. The board itself has no role in that. However, we do have a role with regard to gifted education. I will say, Senator Lucas, if you haven't had a chance to read our regs yet, one of the things that I think is most important that we've done is that we require a pipeline. You know, we can change the admission standards now, but we still need to change how we are identifying gifted and make sure that there is indeed a real pipeline starting earlier in the education process for those students who are gifted to have their potential recognized. Okay. I think, believe it or not, in very few minutes that covers everything. Are there any questions? And Dr. Wilson, do you have anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I'll say is almost good after, I guess we're still in morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time and your significant interest in the work that the board and the department are doing on behalf of the children of the Commonwealth. And I've appreciated listening to your questions. And so, Mr. Gecker, I don't have anything to add to the great work that you've done with this presentation, but did want to express that sentiment.
Okay, are there any? Senator Lucas, I think you're speaking, but you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I was just speaking about the regs that you just mentioned. I've not read them yet, but I just told my staff to try to bring a copy of it to me because I want to delve into that after we get off of this Zoom meeting.
Right, thank you.
And Senator Lucas, I'm actually happy to follow up with you directly. These proposed revisions are actually in the executive branch review process, so they are publicly available on our website, but you may not be able to find them on the town hall website just yet. But we'll make sure that we follow up with you so that you can see those revisions that the board approved last month.
But thank you. I would appreciate that because I was just getting my staff to scurry around to try to find them. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. We'll send them to you directly.
I will tell them stop being nervous right now. Okay.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So thank you for your time.
So General Assembly members, thank you so much for spending a morning with us. Your engagement in education in the Commonwealth is so appreciated by our students, our teachers, our principals, our superintendents, and the Department of Education. And I just look forward to continuing to work with you to create the best education possible for students in the Commonwealth. Senator Lucas, would you like to say any parting words?
Yes, this has just been so enlightening, and I just appreciate all of the work that's been done. I just can't thank you enough because it really puts us in a real good posture to legislate when we go back to the session. So for that, I'm grateful.
Well, thank you all, and everyone have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.